The Summer Institute of Economic Research at the African School of Economics. I know it has been a very, very long day. I think 12 papers from 9:30 this morning. But we are very happy that most of you are here to follow this extremely important panel discussion entitled Financing Development. So we are extremely thrilled to have today two experts in finance talking to us about the challenges and the opportunities in the financial sector and its role in promoting development and growth. So we have the two panelists. First, Ahmet Aguemon. Mr. Aguemon is a board member of the African School of Economics. I said a board member of the African School of Economics. You should have got it by now, you know. Yeah. So, but Mr. Aguemon studied. Actually, what I have in common with Ahmet before he joined the board is that we have the same mathematics professor. So this is.
I got the number actually.
Oh, that's it. So the lady who inspired me to do math was also, his teacher in Collège Montaigne here. So he went on to get his degree in management in Paris at École des Sciences de Gestion. École supérieure de gestion, voilà, in Paris. And then an MBA at Wharton School, which is the business school of the University of Pennsylvania. So, and then currently his big project is the Emerging Africa Investment Partners, which is an extremely ambitious project, which is to raise funds, to raise financial resources to promote development and also invest in huge, big projects in Africa. So, and also he also has a Kulatech, which is a startup in technology that, we hope that we will be able to work with them because at ASC we want to promote not only the use of technology, but also hopefully generate technological applications of the kind of research that we do here in finance and in economics. And the second panelist is Luc Morio, who studied at HEC, which is the business school in Paris. And he's currently a member of a comité de direction, a member of the leadership team of Société Générale here. And he also worked, and I think maybe that's where Ahmet and himself connected, because they both work at ECP, which is an investment banking organization. That has headquarters not only in Africa but also in France. So, I trust Ahmet's judgment very well, and he told me that he's perhaps one of the smartest finance specialists around. So we hope to have an extremely exciting discussion on two themes. There are two key ideas here. One is, how do you alleviate financial constraints to be, like, let's say, infrastructure project in development? This is one of the, I think there was a paper this morning about infrastructure development, and one of the key issues that were raised is, where do you get the money from? How do you get the government to commit? How do you get the government to get credibility and credit worthiness to be able to raise money so that they can build roads and provide infrastructure for development. One second point that we'll be discussing is about saving behavior. It's well known that Africans, in particular Beninese, don't save enough, and there might be economic reason, there might be cultural reason, and there might be also, political reason as to why we don't save enough. After all, we are part of zone franc, and with some specific characteristics that are not shared by, let's say, Anglophone countries or Lusophone countries. Does it have anything to do with our saving behavior? So those are two questions that we ask, and they will take a turn and tell us what they think. And after that, two of our specialists in finance and economics who are in the room are instructed to give some feedback, comments, and questions. And first we have Kagba Kuse, who is an assistant professor at African School of Economics, and we have Professor Yazi Disu, who is the chair of the economic department of the University of Ottawa, who is visiting us today. Okay, so without further ado, Ahmet.
Ready? I only heard this side. So let me ask again. Let me say it again. Good evening, everybody. Good. So when the professor told me, oh, you have to come and speak on Wednesday evening, I said, sure, what do you want me to talk about? He said, finance and development. I said, okay. But this is actually a very, very wide subject. It can go from financial inclusion to financing infrastructure to alternative financing for the private sector. It's a very, very wide subject. So I thought, what is it that I'm going to discuss? And I thought, hold on one second. I used to do finance, and I just moved back to a developing country. Here's your finance and developing in one sentence. So I'm like, why don't I come and talk about myself and what I've done or what I'm trying to do, at least on our small scale in Benin. So from the professor introduction, I studied in the US. I studied in Wharton. Then I worked for Goldman Sachs in London, financing, expanding sub-Saharan Africa. Then I moved on to Dubai, where I was heading Africa for VTB Capital, which is a Russian investment bank. And then Lionel Zinsou was named Prime Minister of Benin. He asked me to join his cabinet, and I moved back to Benin. That was a little bit over a year ago. But one thing that fascinated me while I was in Benin is to discover things that you don't see from being overseas. The human capital and the huge potential that still exists, that we have. And these are things that you won't even see through statistics that you get from the World Bank or the IMF, because obviously we have, and this is the case for most sub-Saharan African countries, is over 50, 60, 70% of is through the informal sector. So you don't really capture all those data to the statistics that we see, and people are like, this is Africa. This is a country where people live with $1. I said, you should come to Benin and ask the Zemijan if he lives with $1. So after my public office, one thing that frustrated me a lot being in Benin was the state of our roads. The state of our roads. The roads. Wherever you go in Benin, and I used to live actually in Heavy, Cocotier, which is one of technically the most expensive area, but you can't. The roads are so bad. You have to bring your car to the mechanics every 3 months. So I'm like, what is it? What is it that? Why can't they just fix the roads for us? What is it that they need? Why can't the government finance that infrastructure? And I mean, we are talking about basic needs here, and we have such a low base that people don't even complain about that. But having come freshly, I was very frustrated about that. Let us help them to find a way to finance the roads. So I will come back to that. So what I've done after my public office with the Prime Minister, I've created a small startup called Kulatech. And our objective was really to digitalize the economy and try to scale what we do across the West African corridor. But one thing I must tell you is we have a lot of issues. But two of them, when you look at the financial sector in Benin or in Africa in general, one of them is the low bancarization rate. That's one issue. And the second one is we don't have access to long-term financing. And when you want to finance the development, you need to make long-term bets. When you talk about infrastructure, when you talk about water, financing, you're talking about at least a 10-year time period. Which bank in Benin will lend you money for 10 years? And so we need a structural transformation. First, we need our banks, and I'm talking under the control of my banker friend here. We need our bank to actually be able to capture more of the saving, because I know the professor said earlier that Benin people don't like to save, but Africa is actually one of the continents with the highest savings in the world. But the saving is completely inactive because we cannot capture it. Why? Because we have low bancarization rates. And then the other issue is we need to have a fundamental transformation with our capital market. We need to be able to multiply, to transform that money into long-term funding, which is another issue that we have. So let me talk then about financial inclusion, which is trying to capture those savings from most people from across the country. We have low bancarization rate, but when you think about it, when you think about what we call fintech, which is financial technology, which actually means the use of software or digital platform to provide financial services, Africa today has leapfrogged the rest of the world, and we are number one in fintech. You look at Kenya. I mean, it started, the world fintech is probably 5-6 years old, but fintech in Africa started in Kenya with M-Pesa, over a decade ago. And when you actually think about it, we have the technology, we have the people. What is it that we're waiting for to actually put the two together and expand that financial inclusion? So that's one of the reasons why I've created Kulatech. The first thing we did with Kulatech was we actually bought a fintech platform that allow people to do mobile payment through MTN or Flus, and also do payment through bank card online. And the reason we did is the reason we have a low bancarization rate is actually, there are several reasons, but some of them are: number one, the banking charges are just too high. So when you look at the population that is already segmented, you have the banks, then you have some of the microfinance institutions that came in, but still, when you look at bank charges or the transportation cost, is just too high, and it doesn't enable those institutions to actually reach out to the whole population. So that's been a big issue. So what we've done is to buy that fintech company, and we went to see the banks. We went to see the banks, and we went to see the microfinance institution, and we told them, listen, one of the other reasons that you have why you have a low bancarization rate is your fixed costs are too high. If you have to build an agency in Malanville, you have to build an agency in every corner of the country, it will be too expensive. Especially for that low-income population, it will not be sustainable. But what you need, the product we are offering them at the time is what we call the Uberization of bank agency, which is in fact agency banking. But let me tell you, we went to one meeting, and there was the board in front of us, and we explained to them, whether you want it or not, this is the direction the world is heading. Okay, you will need to lower your costs in order to gain market share. And just look at Kenya. Look at Kenya. It exists already. Today in Kenya, 75% of the population is actually using mobile banking. 5% of the GDP is being transacted every day. You look at Orange Money in Mali. They move half the GDP through mobile money. So that has clearly been the solution to reach out to the rest of the population and increase that bancarization rate. So we went to see those banks and we told them, what we try to offer you is to offer you this platform that will enable you to create those agents across the country, increase your network, and then reach out to that population and ultimately get that saving. I remember again that lady who was the chief technical officer. Almost, if she didn't slap me, she's like, "What is this guy talking about? These are things for white people. These are things that work in Europe. It will never work here." But I wanted to tell her, that Africa is actually number one in fintech. So we need to ensure that those people, when we want to, if we want to be able to finance development, if we want to be able to tap into those savings to increase that bancarization, banks need to have that transformation. So what we did, with the banks, it will just be too difficult. So what we've done now, we actually went to see the municipalities. So I went to see the municipalities and said, listen, you don't have money to repair the roads. Let us help you finance it. But how are we going to finance it? We told them, let's have a contract. We will digitalize your whole system, which means all your local tax collection will go through a digital system. But one of the problems that happen is they will tell you, oh, we don't know who has paid the tax and who has not. We don't know how to account for the different people. So what we created first is a digital PO box system. So it's a platform called Mboni that will actually come into effect very soon. That is already ready. That's been prepared. And it provides a 6-digit PO box. So what does that do is it allows you, any of you, if you want to indicate your house, today you will say what? You say, oh, once you get to that station, turn left, take the second street right. Today you won't have to do that again. All you have to do is to download our application. And by the way, I didn't come here to sell my application. But you have to download the application, and it will give you a 6-digit code that will be your digital PO box. And with that, people can, through a GPS code, pictures, and vocal note, will be able to come straight to your house. So we provide that to the municipalities. But what fundamentally that does for them is that allows them to account for different houses in the municipalities. So now we have signed a contract with one of the biggest cities in Benin. and we will start the deployment of that platform. They will be able to account for, we are providing, what we're providing to them is, number one, digital PO box for all the houses. Number two, we allow them for all the services to go through the digital platform. What does that mean? That means more efficiency, more speed, and transparency. So once now the municipality is able to have every year can say, okay, this is how much I received, because you can trace everything. What do we do with them? We do what we call securitization. We securitize that money, and we help them borrow money internationally or regionally to be able to finally repair those roads. So this is what we've been trying to do on our small scale to try to finance the development, and this is how we've been trying to help our municipalities, help the countries with innovative ways. But my main point here is we need to make sure that we bring in technology into our financial system to be able to tap into all those savings and be able to control the small part that we can. Of course, while we're doing this, you still need to finance infrastructure. You still need to build bridges. You still need to do all this. But once you have that transparency, and when it comes to financial inclusion, fintech, the potential of fintech is just phenomenal. I don't want to be talking for too long, so I will leave the mic to Luc, and I will be open to all your questions. Thank you.
10 years in the financial sector. First, as a private equity investor, I made a buyout of a number of banks in West Africa. Then, as MD of regional SME and microfinance financial group, and more recently as a member of SocGen team in charge specifically of strategy and development in West Africa. When a professor asked me to speak with you about financing development, my first thought was liquidity. Just perhaps a professional mind, daily professional issue, but the question for me is, when we want to finance development, where is liquidity, and where is liquidity at an affordable cost? I would say at an affordable cost, and I just wrote some thoughts, and I hope that these thoughts will give you a new insight. Just for instance, the latest bond issuance of Benin over 5 years was around 7% a year, 6.9. It was extremely high, an increasing rate. A few years ago it was 6.2. Okay, we know that it's a bad season. End of year, it's never the good season. The better season generally it's February and July, but for debt in Waimu zone. But the fact it's 6.9% is extremely high, and it's 140 basis points spread over Ivorian debts. And the spread now is currently increasing and increasing. So that's, I think that for bankers, it was the sign of more stressful debt market in the region. And it is linked with less liquidity in the financial sector. And it's less liquidity at just the time we are speaking about financing development and starting this financing. In Benin, the social security, which is the main depositor of all banks, and in the region, the main depositor in every country is the social security and the public treasury. They ask interest rates in Benin between 6.8% and 7.5%. Now, this is interest rates that the state asks the commercial banks. And therefore, you have people crying, coming to you and telling that 8% is too much for a loan. Okay, but if you take money at 7, lending at 8, and making non-performing loans at the average rate of non-performing loans in Benin is 25% officially. The reality is more close than 35. So, you can't earn money. That's the first, state policy is the first problem for liquidity, especially in Benin. In other countries, it's less important, but in Togo, it's close to Benin. Central bank decisions, I think that you study it a lot in a school of economics, but central bank decisions are also a problem. The latest news is that starting, I think, on Friday or next Monday, the interest rate, refinancing interest rate at Central Bank West Africa will climb from 3.5% to 4.5%. And now the refinancing potential of banks is limited to 2 times their net equity. So if you add Basel III constraints or Basel-like constraints, the fact is that the banking sector is clearly running out of money to finance. The insurance sector has very little money, and it is already in banks, so no use. So the question is really about perhaps savings. But I disagree with low bank penetration rates. I don't know, I don't have exact figures for Benin because the figures I have are not really reliable. But for Togo, okay, Togo is close to Benin, it's the same environment. The bank penetration rate is 70%, including microfinance. And microfinance and bank are just the same financial sector. In Nigeria, they call microfinance bank. So in Rwanda, it's domestic banks. That's the same sector. 70%, you have extreme poverty in our countries. So, the other 25%, you don't have a lot to do with. I think that it would be useful for them, but really, in terms of additional liquidity, it would be really useless, I think. But you already have 70% in the financial sector. Okay, you have a lot of money which is outside the financial sector, but most of this money is not compliant. That's another problem. So the fact is that really, in the context you have more and more banks. We have close to 14, 15 banks now in Benin. We have 16 in Nigeria. Just see the problem. We don't have the liquidity to finance a number of infrastructure projects. If you take a power plant which is worth at least $100 million, if you want to do something with some utility, I think that you can finance one in Benin with all the liquidity of the banking sector, but not 2. And the level of NPL loans is so high in reality that everybody is afraid of Basel-like reforms, which are crucial for the sector, but the banking sector will be running short of liquidity, but also of equity. So the escape way is concessional loans. The escape way is development banks. Just by the way, you have a big FX risk. You know that 40%, around 40% of Beninese debt is in other currencies than ZOF and Euro. So you have debt in Kuwaiti dinar, you have debt in British pound, you have debt in US dollar, in all these currencies. You know, you can lose a lot of money. And don't think it's the role of states to support this FX risk. You have also a problem of repayment tenure. Banks and all the private sector is asked to finance paving roads in secondary towns. That's the previous government. Not the one of Lionel, but before. And to pave roads, we borrow money on 5 years, 7 years. Just when I was at school, a professor told me that just when you finance a project, you have to have a reimbursement way which matches with your project. We don't have. So we need new mechanism. I think that we need to speak about securitization to raise more debt. We need to speak about more equity. ECP, the fund manager I worked with for 9 years, is one of the largest private equity fund managers in Africa. And we only manage $1.5 billion, which is extremely low. And we need more equity. I think that the picture is not so good. A lot of financing development was relying on oil prices and on raw material prices. So I think that we have cycles in the economy. I don't know a lot of bankers which are optimistic in the region, except perhaps in Ivory Coast. And I think that my final words will be the following. We should lower our expectations. 15 years ago, Africa was a total mess. 5 years ago, it was the new Eden. You know, when you are doing 5% GDP growth a year with demographic growth of 3.5, it's not so much. We have to remember that. We are clearly in a development trend, that's clear. But we should lower expectations. We should be careful on selecting projects and executing them. When I see development projects with money which is borrowed and which mainly finance hotels through seminars, CFAO and SOCAR and all car dealers with new cars and a lot of consultants which are much paid. I thought that one of the top bankers in the country, I should have got one of the top salaries. No, my colleagues of development, which are making just meetings and meetings, are paid 3 times what I'm earning, and I'm earning a lot of money. And the problem is that this money often is lent to our countries. Yes. This is not gifts, this is not grants, these are loans. So I think that this money, but the money perhaps is not carefully used. And when I give you money, just take it and what do you want? Okay, but when I give you money and give it me back, none of the development projects called BAP programs and someone could have repayments based on their results. We have to recognize it. So I think that we should work on changing structural problems when we were speaking about savings in rural Benin, in rural Africa, the problem is that 70% of the people don't have an ID card. That's a big problem. In Guinea, in Chad, for instance, in Benin, that's a big problem. You don't have an ID card. So you can find other ways, but if the banking sector want to collect these resources, you have to be compliant with a number of regulations. Perhaps you have to change the regulation to them, but that's also a problem. We have to unlock all the potential of land, which is really a collateral, which is not used as it should. So I think that's all some thoughts, but just we should lower expectations and find practical ways to do a bit more and to better use money. And don't forget that the better financing is self-financing. You know, an economy that is going well on a sound basics. A lot of entrepreneurs have developed our countries with self-financing, and I think that's not the worst thing.
That we have a problem with the collecting of the saving of people, and then basically if we collect this saving, if we want to finance infrastructure, the question is how will we transform these, because these can be short-term funds. How can we transform these short-term funds into long-term funds, right? And this has something to do with kind of financial engineering, securitization, etc. So, but we have also the problem of financing the private sector. So, the private sector has a big problem about getting financing. If you go to the bank, you are an SME, for example, it's very difficult for you to get credit, right? Because of low historical data about low record, about your financial statement, etc. So how can we, I won't say affect, but how can we wish this private sector? Private equity is doing that. This is, I think, this is their job, but there is still some job to be done there, right? Second thing is the financing of infrastructure, which is a big problem. I think you develop in a broad way the problem we are facing. Now the question is whether we would go through kind of securitization, so maybe some kind of bonds to finance this kind of project. How can we go like with alternative, let's say, kind of alternative financing in a broad way? So for the moment, this will be my two questions.
Thank you. Well, the first question is an interesting one, and very good that we actually have a banker who works in Benin who will be able to tell you why he will give money or not to the private sector or SMEs. But one thing he mentioned earlier is that and you might notice, one, the new regulation coming in, which is the refinancing rate at moving from 3.5 to 4.5, and the bank can only tap that window up to 2 times the equity. And also the non-performing loan, which is standing at 25% officially, but he said it was more like 35%. But something that I want to add to that is the reality is the private sector is competing against the government. That's the reality we have today. And the government drives up that liquidity. If I'm a bank and I have the government in front of me and I have a SME, there is no question. I just lend the money to the government. And that's an issue coming also from our government. That's number one. Number two, I think Luc explained that as well. The social security, the social security in this country, which actually has a lot of liquidity, plus that money into the banks, and ask for a rate of between 6 and 8%. That's a lot. That's a lot, and that's not sustainable for the economy. That's just not sustainable for the economy. And on top of that, and that's my personal view, when you have an institution like the IMF that forbid the government from going into the international market, for various reasons that we can discuss, that also stops the government from accessing all the resources they can. Because in a normal country, what you need to have is you need the government to be able to access money internationally, regionally, and leave the local money to go to the private sector. I will let Luc.
Yeah, thank you. Two things. The first one, I think that SMEs don't have any financing problem in Benin. I think that SMEs don't have any financing problems in Benin. Bad SMEs have a lot of problems. Non-compliant SMEs have a lot of problems. If you are coming to visit a bank and say, okay, I manage a 3 billion CFA turnover company. My net income is negative 50 million. Everybody knows that you are cheating. That's a problem. Be at our place. What would you do? Okay, say, okay, this is junk paper. You have to take this into account. That's the first thing. The second thing is that on the other way, you have good projects, good entrepreneurs, and these people often come to visit you and say, okay, I have a project. It is worth 100 million CFA. Okay, what is your what can you put in? And the guy tells you 5 million, or 5%, or 10 million, 10%. Okay, and generally what I'm saying is that, okay, if I want to finance you, what I would do is that I will create a special purpose vehicle. I will hire you. I will perhaps ask you to put 5% as stock option and so on, and I will do the project myself. Because otherwise, while taking a 3% gross margin and taking equity-like risk, it's not so profitable for us. And it would be clearly unprofitable. So I think that SMEs have a lot of financing possibilities. Certainly, we could do more, have stronger banks. Our banks are so weak. They are extremely weak. You know that regulation allows banks to take on a single risk 75% of our equity. 75% of our equity. So, I think that in the banks, those who are earning the most are just the bankers themselves. Our banks are so weak. Normally, the smaller you are, the more equity in percentage you should have. It's just about division of risk. But we have extremely weak banks. And I think that stronger banks with stronger capitalization, because everybody is clearly undercapitalized. And a number of them are capitalized in reality, if you have to apply Basel III constraints, are capitalized under zero. I think that a stronger banking system should pave way to a more financing, because you have shareholders that need a return. And I think that the new amendments to regulation, which just spoke about from central bank, are just in this way because they are reducing again bank profitability on treasury. And now bank profitability should be on interest margin. And that's more and more difficult. But the problem is that we have too many banks and too little companies which are eligible to a loan, and that can, tick the boxes. There's also a big land problem. It's not about, there's a guarantee problem. But the guarantee is just not about guarantee funds. Okay, guarantee funds is nice. I always ask myself how guarantee funds support so huge losses on underlying loans, because what bankers put on the guarantee package are really, it's like anti-selection. So really, I really ask every day how they can afford that. That's not myself. The problem is really when you have a guarantee fund, it covers up to 50%. Okay, but you have the other 50%. So recently, a guy from guarantee fund told me, okay, I need to make this. You have to take my guarantee fund and the guarantee fund of a friend. I can introduce you. So 50% per 50% is 100%. You are fully covered, and that's it. I think that's not a solution. I think that there is land. We can use land as collateral. And the fact is that there is a number of bankrupts here, which is extremely high. So when you have a non-performing loan rates of 25%, it's not on individuals. State agents, it's less than 0.5%. Big companies, multinational companies, it's less than 1%. So as a 25%, where if you address it in reality to the SME, local SME sector, it's 30-40%, perhaps 50%. So that's a problem, and this is why I think that the better thing is just about self-financing, just small additional financing, but the banking sector can't afford to finance really the SME sector above what is acceptable for banks. And I think that the banking sector has already reached